Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. It's another, this is part two and our final part of looking at the history and current affairs of Egypt. As everybody knows, this is our All Africa edition. And we're continuing to explore North Africa. And this is part two of Egypt. And of course, who better to teach us about this country or any African country than our returning champion and our tour guide, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Abayomi is a historian, journalist, longtime leftist activist, and more. As always, before we start, reminder to our audience to please share widely all of One Plus One's content, past and present episodes, our playlists, help us overcome the far-right algorithms and the dominant monopoly Western corporate state media and pseudo-leftist websites have in the social media world by sharing our content. And again, share us across social media and email, and please donate if you can to One Plus One at our PayPal. And if people are having trouble and would prefer an alternative form to donate, then please get in touch with me at yurismatter@gmail. And sometimes Facebook blocks my ability to share One Plus One. So again, please share widely. It helps the show immensely, and it's our only way of overcoming colonial, pro-imperialist, sexist, heteronormative, and racist media. And now onto the topic at hand. So Abayomi, last week when we were covering Egypt, I think we concluded on British colonialism in Egypt and what were the conditions of the Egyptians under British colonialism. So now we're going to talk about the independence of Egypt and the current affairs of Egypt. So my first question is, when Egypt became independent, was it one of violent struggle or was it one of a peaceful transition of power?
It was definitely a violent struggle involved. There was a lot of political ferment that was taking place in Egypt, going all the way back to the 19th century with the advent of Ahmed Urabi, who was an Egyptian military officer and who had a lot of nationalist leanings. There were internal struggles that were taking place between those who were more allied with the Ottoman Turks and those who wanted to have an independent existence for Egypt, and those who wanted to have a close alliance with France and Britain. So in 1869, there was the opening of the Suez Canal, but even prior to that, a lot of the Egyptian pashas, which is a term that comes from the Ottoman Turks, that attempted to modernize the country. And in doing this, they borrowed a lot of money from the European banks, British banks, and others on the European mainland. As a result of that, they fell into deep financial difficulties due to the foreign debt of Egypt. So this caused a lot of consternation among the Egyptian people. And then, of course, as a result of the expansion of Egypt, they became a cash crop economy, producing cotton, which was heavily exported to Britain and other European countries. They grew, and then they attempted under one of the monarchical leaders to take control of neighboring Ethiopia. And this happened, which was a dramatic failure, because on the one hand, this was in 1875, 1876, they were able to take over Massawa, which is today a port in Eritrea. And then in 1876, after the Abyssinians mobilized under Yohannes, under his empire, they were able to beat back the Egyptians and take control, running the Egyptians out of Ethiopia. And then as a result of that, it caused a lot of economic problems as well inside of Egypt. The failed intervention into Ethiopia in 1875, 1876. And after that, of course, they fell into deeper financial crisis. And then they fell under the British, who sent in military forces, and they eventually became a British protectorate around 1882. And that lasted, in effect, all the way up until around 1922. Now, what happened was that in after World War One, the Ottoman Turks as an empire was eliminated during the course of the war. After that, the war was ended, and there was the Paris Peace Conference that took place
Yeah.
in 1919.
Yes.
And there was a group of Egyptian nationalist leaders, intellectuals, artists, and so forth, who went to Paris to participate in these talks to negotiate for the future of Egypt. And they were denied the right to participate by the British. So this caused a lot of anger, not only on the part of the WAFT, which is like one of the earliest political parties in Egypt, but among the Egyptian masses. So there was a huge uprising in 1919 that involved broad segments of the Egyptian population. Women, young people, workers all joined together to demand the withdrawal of British imperialism from Egypt.
Wow.
So they had to reach some type of agreement because the rebellion was so widespread. The British had just come out of World War One. So what happened was that they said that they would give independence to Egypt in 1922, which is what happened. So it became an independent state in 1922. However, in 1923, they decided on a constitution, but it was a constitutional monarchy. It still maintained a lot of the old style monarchical rule. At the same time, it set up a parliament with a constitution. And this happened up until about 1930. At certain points during this period, the monarchy in Egypt, who had been descendants of Muhammad Ali, who had been a Turkish inspired monarch going back to the period of the 19th century, and his descendants had pretty much been in charge of the situation in Egypt all the way up until about 1922. And even after that, they continued to wield tremendous influence.
So
And they were in
Egypt,
turn.
so Egypt's real okay. So Egypt's independence was actually 1922, and it was
Right.
a monarch. And then this monarch was, and this monarch, I assume you can answer this question. This monarch was heavily tied to British interests and the Anglo-Western imperial world, but basically was doing a lot of the bidding of British imperials.
Exactly. And this was the problem because the uprising in 1919 had largely been secular, involved not the monarchy per se or the elites, but the ordinary people, the working people, women and young people were the leaders, the vanguard of the 1919 uprising. And this was happening at a time period where nationalism among the oppressed nations was on the rise. We saw a similar situation in Sudan, where there were uprisings there as well as other countries. In Africa during World War One, there had been, in other parts of Africa, there had been uprisings. In Nyasaland, for example, in 1915, when they tried to draft Africans into the British military to fight during World War One. There was an armed uprising led by John Chilembwe. This was in 1915. So it was a period of political ferment among the oppressed. So what happened after 1919, the country became independent officially in 1922, but there was still a lot of unrest inside the country. You had the WAF party, which was still calling for independence of Egypt. And then another group came into being called New Egypt,
Okay.
which largely was young people. And they were demanding immediate independence, the expulsion of British and all foreign influence from Egypt. And people who were involved in that movement were people like Anwar Sadat, who later became president of Egypt, and also Gamal Abdel Nasser was also involved during the 1940s in this largely youth-led movement.
So then
And
tell us. So then tell us how did the monarch get ousted, and then what is the socio-economic legacy? So Egypt now a country, no more of monarchs and colonial viceroys, no more pharaohs, no more sultans. It's now a republic. So talk to us how that came to be. And then the first was before Nasser, there was a military man and a semi-democrat, arguably Mohammed. Naguib, I think that's how you say his name. What is his socio-economic legacy to the vast working class of Egypt? And he was part of a leftist, anti-colonial, big tent party called the Liberation Rally. So talk to us about that before we get into Nasser.
yeah, in 1952, there was the Free Officers Movement coup, which overthrew the monarchy, and they were nationalist oriented. In 1953, they formed what was known as the Socialist Party of Egypt. But there was a conflict between Nasser and Mohammed Naguib, and he was removed from his position around 1954. And then Nasser became pretty much the sole leader. By 1956, he became president of Egypt. And during that time period,
So so so
he
so 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 so
so he
Mohammed
moved out
Naguib.
Naguib.
Okay, so Naguib. So there's not much one can say about his socio-economic legacy. Then not much one can say then about that.
Only that there were differences between him and Nasser. He was removed from his position, and Nasser consolidated his own position in the leadership around 1954. And then in 1956, he became president. Nasser became president.
Okay, okay, perfect.
And,
So, okay,
and
so
that's when they nationalized the Suez Canal
okay,
and other
so
resources in Egypt in 1956.
so now we're on to Nasser. Well, you already talked about how he came to power.
Yeah,
So just talk to us then. What is his socio-economic legacy to the vast working class of Egypt and the vast poor? Because from the research I've done on Egyptian history, in terms of social mobility, he did leave behind a very good popular legacy in Egypt compared to all leaders before him, including Cleopatra, correct? And Nasser was also part of the Liberation Rally, and he later led the National Union, which was also a big tent of left wingers, anti-colonialism, anti-Zionism, anti-Muslim Brotherhood, which is also very important. So they were very anti-sectarian and anti-clerical. They were leftists, but they were anti-communist leftists. And later, that same party, the Liberation Rally, became the Arab Socialist Union. And yes, so talk to us about Gamal Abdel Nasser, his socio-economic legacy to the vast working class of Egyptians and the poor, and then if you want to also talk about his foreign policy, feel free to also talk about that.
yeah. As you pointed out, Egypt had been largely under a monarchy going back at least to 4500 BC. Some say even further. So we're talking about over 6,000 years of monarchical and empire rule in Egypt. And then all of a sudden in 1952, after World War II, the officers, the free Egyptian officers, took power and they displaced the monarchy, King Farouk, and became a secular state and has been that since the last 74 years. So there's no mention, as far as I know, of bringing back the monarchy to control Egypt or even to have a privileged position within the Egyptian state. Now, this is interesting because in Iran, which is in West Asia, which is not an Arab country, it's the people consider themselves Persians.
Yeah.
There was a monarchy there too under the Pahlavi family. And with the efforts to destabilize the Islamic Republic of Iran, they've been utilizing the son of the Shah as a potential replacement for the supreme leader and the president of Iran. But in Egypt, I have not heard of any effort. I don't even know where these people are at this point. The descendants of Muhammad Ali from the 19th century all the way up to King Farouk. It's not clear exactly where they are. And there doesn't appear to be any effort among the monarchists in Egypt to bring them back to power. So since 1952, it's been a secular state there. And with the nationalization of the Suez Canal, this inflamed the British, the French, as well as the Zionist entity in Tel Aviv. So they attacked the Egyptian army and the Egyptian government in 1956. And there was a fight that was going on. And interestingly enough, the United States, under Dwight Eisenhower, told the British they had to stop what they were doing. And if they didn't stop, they would withdraw the terms of the loans that had been granted to them in the aftermath of World War II. I think the US wanted to make sure that Britain was not attempting to reassert its colonial legacy amidst the almost complete dominance of the United States after World War II in regard to world imperialism. So this is a very interesting development.
And also interesting. Sorry to interrupt, but
No problem.
ironically enough, it was actually I believe it was it was one of the Dulles brothers. I'm blanking out which one, but it was the one that was part of the State Department
Yeah.
who when Nasser kept saying he was going to nationalize the Suez Canal, he had a meeting with him, and Nasser was part of the non-aligned movement. He wanted good relations and détente with the West, wanted good relations and détente with the Soviet Union, even though he was even though he was an anti-communist leftist. And apparently, John Foster Dulles or one of Dulles brothers, had a meeting with him and basically called him a whole bunch of insults, like a godless communist and stuff like that. And then Nasser basically was furious at the end of the meeting, was basically like, okay, nationalizing the Suez Canal. So I think that's a very interesting part of history that should be in the record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting because in 1955, there was the famous Bandung Conference in Indonesia. And out of that, the antecedents of the non-aligned movement came about, which was formed officially in 1961. But at the Bandung Conference, now this was when Nasser had taken power. He had consolidated his power after Muhammad Naguib had been removed. When he went to the Bandung Conference, he wanted, this is the story I've heard, wanted to represent Sudan as well as Egypt. Now, this has been something that was instituted under the British colonial system, where they brought about the joint administration of Egypt and Sudan. So he wanted to represent Sudan at this conference, and the Sudanese rejected it wholeheartedly. But yeah, so in 1956, the war took place. It was resolved with the intervention of the United States and the United Nations. And of course, they took over the Suez Canal in 1956. So Nasser became a national hero in Egypt and throughout West Asia, as well as Africa as a whole.
What more can you?
Also,
Yeah, yeah.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, no, go ahead and ask because I was just going to
Yeah,
mention.
well, I was going to ask, what else can you tell us about his socio-economic legacy, and provide our audiences who may not know about the Suez Canal crisis. What was so important about the Suez Canal? What was it going to do for Egyptians, for Egyptian people when Nasser threatened and finally did, nationalize it?
Well, the resources that were paid by shipping companies, by various states for passage through the Suez Canal, when it was built, it cut tremendously the time it would take to transport goods from Asia, through North Africa to Europe. So it was very, very important in regard to the economic viability of the state of Egypt. That was very, very important in that regard. And after 1956, they took on other projects to modernize Egypt, one of which was the Aswan Dam, which is in the southern part of Egypt. And that was done in order to provide electricity, hydroelectric power, which is essential for modernization, particularly in the 20th century. So this was the contributions that he made. Also, a major contribution of Gamal Abdel Nasser was his Pan-Africanism, his alliance with Kwame Nkrumah, for example, because under European colonialism, whether it's the British, the French, or the others, they always attempted to divide Africa north of the Sahara from Africa south of the Sahara. However, in 1958, there was the first Conference of Independent African States, which Egypt had participated in. I think it was 8 states at that time which were independent: Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, and there was also Sudan, Ghana, and Ethiopia. And that was in April of 1958. And then later in December of 1958, there was the All-African People's Conference, which brought together 62 different nationalist organizations and independent states. That was held in Accra, Ghana as well, just like the first Conference of Independent African States in April. So in that regard, he was progressive, and he also hosted a lot of liberation movements from the African continent as well. You had people there from the African National Congress of South Africa, people like Amilcar Cabral of the PAIGC. I've seen rare footage that was taken by Malcolm X, actually, when he went to the Organization of African Unity Summit in July of 1964. Films, 8mm films that Malcolm X had actually taken along with Amilcar Cabral and others who were involved in the African liberation movements. It's also important to note that he was accepted at the OAU summit in July of 1964, which was the second summit, and invited to stay on in Egypt to participate in Islamic education. He had taken courses at the Islamic University in Cairo and wrote articles for the Egyptian Gazette newspaper, and was a highly respected guest in Egypt. Now, he went to Egypt in April, between April and May of about 6-7 weeks in 1964. He came back to the United States, where he, in late June, formed the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which was patterned, in his opinion, on the OAU. After that was formed, he went back to Africa in July of 1964 and remained there for 5 months. Of course, his life was under threat here in the United States by his former comrades in the Nation of Islam, as well as the US government. So he stayed there for 5 months and then came back again to the United States. But he spent most of the time abroad. The most concentrated period of time that he spent was in Egypt. So that gives you an indication of Nasser's politics during that particular time period. Also, people like David Graham Du Bois, who was the stepson of W.B. Du Bois, the daughter of Shirley Graham Du Bois, had also relocated in Egypt during that time period. Then after the coup in Ghana in 1966, Shirley Graham Du Bois, who was the second wife and widow of W.B. Du Bois, spent a lot of time in Egypt as well as spending time in the People's Republic of China. So that gives you some idea of the Egyptian politics during that period. As I mentioned earlier, Um, they were co-founders of the Non-Aligned Movement, which was started in Belgrade in 1961. He was part of the Pan-African Movement, the Conference of Independent African States, the All African Peoples Conference, and also one of the co-founders of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. As I said, the second summit was held in Egypt, in Cairo in 1964. So yes, that's some of the legacy of Gamal Abdel Nasser.
Incredible, and of course, as a feminist, he did believe in the equality of women. Women were not forced to wear the headscarf if they wanted to. I think Nasser was more or less okay with it. They were allowed to work in the work. They were allowed to enter the workplace, and of course, get educated. And I believe it's the first time in Egyptian history where, if you look at social mobility, and if you look at life expectancy amongst the vast majority who are working class and who are poor, uh, under Nasser, he really gave a majority of his people who were colonized people a leg up in society and so forth like that. And apparently, even till this day, many Egyptians look fondly at the Nasser period. So,
Exactly.
but
Exactly. But
before we talk about his death and the rise of Anwar Sadat, let's spend a brief period of time talking about this. So before we discuss the socioeconomic legacy of Anwar Sadat, talk to us about the Muslim Brotherhood. What kind of a sect of Islam do they follow? Are they extreme, radical, far right, Sunni, Salafist, and Wahhabiists? And then talk to us about Syed Qutb, who was and ironically it was and Syed Qutb was the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and ironically it was his detention in an Egyptian jail where he and his followers and co-workers were tortured under the leadership of Nasser, which inspired his writings, and that any collaborator of the West and any secularist who harms a jihadi, they face death because they are infidels and so forth. So talk to us about Said Qutb and the Muslim Brotherhood and the kind of Islam they claim that they represent.
yeah, there was different tendencies within the Egyptian independence movement, and some of the more secular forces um, were motivated by people like, for example, Ahmed Shakti, who was a poet and a writer who surfaced during the 19th century, the early 20th century. He had called, for Egyptian independence. He placed a lot of emphasis on Egyptian culture, even though he was educated heavily outside of Egypt and was of mixed ancestry, Egyptian ancestry. But he was a firm secularist and an advocate of national independence. Then you have people on the cultural level who also had a lot of influence. For example, Ahmed Rami, who was a poet and writer, who wrote a lot of the songs for Kulthum, who was Egyptian classical vocalist and also a film star. Now, the Egyptian film industry goes way back to at least to the 1920s. They were doing their own films. And a lot of these films had nationalist and culturally nationalist content within them. So there was already a tendency towards secularism in Egypt, whether it's through the film industry, through music, poetry, literature, and so forth. But then at the same time, there were those who felt that the influence of the West was negative and that they have to return to a more fundamentalist form of Islam. And this is what the El-Ikhwan Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood, represented. And of course, there was a struggle between them and more secularist forces in Egypt. And that struggle has gone on all the way up to the modern period. If we look at what happened and after 2010, 2011, the first person that was elected in the elections of 2012 was a representative of the Muslim Brotherhood, party that was allied with the Muslim Brotherhood, Mohammed Morsi. But going back,
And
of
they call
course,
and are they would we call them, safe to say, call them fundamentalist Sunnis, a very clerical form of Sunniism, of Islam's. So they would be more or less, uh, well, they would find sort of of a kindred spirit in the Gulf monarch of Saudi Arabia, correct?
yeah, yeah, that's a potential, and that probably had a lot to do with the conflict, between the Muslim Brotherhood and the more secular forces that existed in Egypt. Yeah, so I think that the Muslim Brotherhood was started probably about 90 years ago, during the early part of the mid 20th century. But they have never been able to rule consistently. They ruled for a year uh, back between 2012 and 2013. Then, of course, that year, there was a military coup, which was aligned with the secular forces inside of Egypt.
Interesting. And well, then let's talk about the rise of Anwar Sadat. So talk to us about when Nasser died and then the rise of Anwar Sadat. And what was the socioeconomic legacy of Anwar Sadat, who was a long, high-ranking member of the two major political parties that Nasser led? And I understand that while Nasser was a secular social liberal who believed in feminism, separation of church and state, and of mosque and state, Nasser was an economic socialist, and Sadat, I guess you could say, he was part of this broad church of liberals and socialists. And he was, while a secularist and a moderate Muslim, when it came to socioeconomics, unfortunately, he was a fiscal he was a fiscal conservative, a neoliberal, an economic liberal, and he tolerated Western multinational corporations to essentially exploit Egypt, was very hostile to the workers' rights movement, and suppressed a lot of the radical leftist movements that were socialists, communists, and Marxists. So, in terms of social mobility, was he a giant setback for the vast working class, working poor in Egypt? I'm very curious your response on that.
Yeah, I think his legacy has to be broken up into two parts. In 1967, there was a so-called Six-Day War, where there had been a plan, according to the historical narrative, of an Egyptian attack on Israel.
Yeah.
And they were tipped off, some people say, by Nasser's son-in-law, who many people believed had been bought off as an agent by the West and also by the state of Israel. So the war proved disastrous. The Israeli Defense Forces were able to take the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, and they also were able to seize control of the Suez Canal. And thousands, some say tens of thousands of Egyptian troops died during that war that lasted only for about a week. And then there was the sinking of a U.S. warship by the state of Israel. And people say it was an accident, and others say no, it wasn't an accident. They wanted to get the United States more heavily involved in the war, which they were already involved anyway. So after the 1967 defeat in the so-called Six-Day War, you saw the Palestinian Liberation Organization move more towards guerrilla warfare, carrying out operations against the Israelis and their collaborators, the hijacking of aircraft, for example, and other events that took place during the late 1960s and early 1970s. Then, in 1970, Nasser dies suddenly from what was said to have been a heart attack. And Anwar Sadat takes over. And for the first few years, he seemed to be following the same pattern as Nasser. Then in 1972, there was some conflict with the Soviet Union. So he did expel Soviet advisors, some of the Soviet advisors that had been in Egypt, that had been invited there by Nasser. Then in 1973, Sadat launched a surprise attack against the state of Israel, and they retook large sections of the Suez and also the Sinai Desert. So this was a major victory for Egypt in 1973. The Soviet Union backed them up, and Henry Kissinger had to step in under Richard Nixon to try to negotiate some type of end to the war. It's called either the October War or the Yom Kippur War of October 1973.
Yeah.
After that occurred, and Egypt was able to regain some of its territory, a considerable amount of its territory, which had been lost in the 1967 war. We mentioned the seizure of the Sinai Desert. There was also the Gaza Strip, which had been administered by Egypt up until 1967. That was totally annexed by the state of Israel. And also we didn't mention the United Arab Emirates. Well, not the United Arab Emirates, but
United Arab
Republic.
This is
which was a unity between Syria and Egypt and even North Yemen for a period of time, which dissolved in 1961. But that was his effort to try to unify the Arab world with the people of the African continent. So yes, so after 1973, when Egypt regained some of its territory, there appeared to be a shift to the right on the part of the Anwar Sadat government. Indications were that he wanted to negotiate some type of permanent ceasefire or agreement with the state of Israel. This caused a lot of controversy during the late 1970s, which ultimately led to Sadat's assassination in 1981.
Yeah,
Sadat. Before that, there's the Camp David Accords that were negotiated in 78 and signed officially in 1979, which recognized the Zionist state of Israel as a legitimate entity in exchange, ostensibly, for Israel not to attack Egypt as the time moved forward.
Yeah, Sadat was murdered by members of the Muslim Brotherhood, led by a doctor who later would become Osama bin Laden's second in command, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Ironically, though, it was Sadat who tolerated the Muslim Brotherhood, and I think he even allowed them to flourish to get rid of his secular left-wing rivals. It's so stupid when people do that in history. And yes, and he was murdered for making peace with Israel. Now, I have a copy. I read the former king of Jordan's wife, Queen Noor, her autobiography several years ago, and she said in her book that when Sadat made peace with Israel, it had nothing to do with Palestinian liberation or even addressing the plight of Palestinians. His normalizing relations with Israel, with many in the Arab world, the Muslim world, the Middle Eastern world, North African, West Asian, and Christians across the region felt that he basically threw the Palestinians and the movement of Pan-Arabism, Pan-West Asianism under the bus. And this was why Noor explains that this was why the Arab League and other bodies of multi-nations in the region of North Africa and West Asia boycotted Egypt and expelled them from these regional bodies. Now, when the Egyptian authorities arrested thousands of Muslim Brotherhood members and those suspected or most likely involved with the murder of Sadat, Ayman al-Zawahiri spoke defiantly behind bars with the media presence, saying that we are the real Islamic Front. We are against imperialism, communism, and Zionism. And then later on, he and others who languished in Egyptian prisons for years until the Egyptian government freed them, send them to join the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and the West's war on the Afghan communist state and the Soviet Union trying to conserve a radical Marxist Leninist Stalinist state there. Very curious your response about that before we talk about Mubarak.
Yes, well, this is very interesting because I can recall when Al Qaeda was formed back in the early 1980s, when the Soviet Union had sent their forces into Afghanistan to defend the government from the reactionary elements that were attempting to overthrow the People's Democratic government of Afghanistan, People's Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. So yes, this is what happened. And after 1979, 1980, the conditions in Afghanistan deteriorated. The U.S. wanted the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. They wanted to reinstall some type of liberal government, but there was no basis for that. So they had to back the jihadists, which is very interesting because Ronald Reagan, when he came into office after 1981, he was describing these people as freedom fighters in the same sense that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, and the others were freedom fighters against the British. I mean, it's totally absurd idea, but this is what he was advancing. He also supported groups like UNITA in Angola, which was fighting against the MPLA in that country. So yes, this is clearly an effort on the part of U.S. imperialism to reinstitute imperialist dominance in Central Asia. And this is what happened. And this war went on for years and years and years. And then, of course, in 2001, they bombed, the United States bombed Afghanistan and occupied the country along with other NATO allies. And that went on for 20 years. And they still could not defeat Afghanistan as a nation, even though today the Taliban is in power and the Socialist Party is nowhere on the radar. But at the same time, despite all that, they were not able to defeat the people of Afghanistan and maintain U.S. Economic and military dominance in Central Asia.
Yeah, it's quite unbelievable. And then going back to Egypt, Sadat's murder led to the rise of Hosni Mubarak. Now, Sadat, towards the end of his life, distanced himself from the Arab Socialist Party and later the Arab Socialist Union. He founded the National Democratic Party, and this is fascinating. So he founded the National Democratic Party, which, according to Wikipedia, believes in secularism, populism. I wonder what kind of populism they mean, though. Egyptian nationalism and neoliberalism. Funnily enough, they were members of the Socialist International, and until they were kicked out of the SI in response to Hosni Mubarak's violent crackdown on left-leaning protesters. So Hosni Mubarak, what is his socioeconomic legacy? I know he continued much the neoliberalism of Sadat. He kept Egypt very secular, though he was a darling of the Western imperial orbit. And like Sadat, he used the Egyptian deep state, its military, its police, and its secret services to continue suppressing the broad left movement, and then as well as the Muslim Brotherhoods. But then inequality continued to grow to horrendous levels under Mubarak as well. And then, of course, also during the War on Terror and the George W. Bush era, suspected terrorists would be sent to places like Egypt and Syria and elsewhere, where they would be brutally tortured. What of Mubarak's legacy can you assess, as well as his foreign policy?
Yeah, well, it was a major political coup for the United States under Jimmy Carter to woo Egypt back. Well, it actually started under Nixon and Ford to woo them back into the Western camp. So they wanted to maintain that. So in exchange for signing of the Camp David Accord in 78 and 79, they got a lot of economic and military assistance from the United States. Egypt became the second largest recipient of U.S. foreign assistance next to the state of Israel. So they had,
Wow.
West Asia and North Africa roped in. Uh, uh, they actually did. So they were heavily funding Egypt and heavily funding the state of Israel at the same time. So they had control over that area of the world, West Asia, North Africa. So this is what happened. So Mubarak, well, even back during the period of Sadat, when the Shah of Iran was overthrown through a popular revolution, he was brought to the United States. The Shah was brought to the United States for medical treatment, but then uh, they wanted him to be sent back to Iran. This is what the revolutionaries wanted. Instead, he was sent to Egypt, where he died there. So that gives you another indication of the far right trajectory of Sadat and later Hosni Mubarak. And they received a lot of money. The AWACS airplanes they received, these are spy planes to keep track of those who were considered enemies of the United States. They were heavily based in Egypt. So yes, Egypt became a satellite, in essence, of U.S. imperialism during the period of the 1980s, 1990s, going all the way into the 2000s under
It,
Mubarak.
it's quite unbelievable because under Nasser's period, Egyptians had a civilizational upgrade, and then in the very short years of Anwar Sadat and Hosni Mubarak, it was a civilizational downgrade, just in terms of horrendous levels of inequality, Western multinational corporations all exploiting Egypt, and none of the profits going to the people. And then social mobility and even life expectancy took a huge downgrade. So that's a perfect segue to this question, which is what led to Mubarak's ouster. And it's safe to argue now that the North African Spring, or the Arab Spring, where people protested and had legitimate grievances about deteriorating socioeconomic conditions, corruption, grotesque inequality, lack of workers' rights, lack of freedom of the press. All of that led to people to protest, but ultimately it was co-opted by Western Gulf Israeli color revolutions, like the end of the USSR and the Eastern Communist Bloc. Mubarak was ousted, and his political party was dissolved by the high courts in Egypt. But from the brief time that Mohammed Morsi was in power under the Muslim Brotherhood, which was ousted by a military coup, you then have under General Sisi, who is far right. He is secularist, but he's far right, and his socioeconomics is very neoliberal. Still very friendly with Israel and the Gulf, and Gulf monarchs, and part of the Western imperialist order. So, talk to us about what led to Mubarak's ouster, and do you think that whatever positivity that was the protest that led to his ouster later got co-opted by Israel, Britain, the United States, France, the European Union, and so forth?
Yeah, well, I think that we have to also look at the export of natural gas from northern Egypt into the state of Israel, which is a major uh, aspect of the cooperation between Egypt and the Zionist state of Israel. So I think that has a lot to do with the situation that exists there now. Also, the siege upon Gaza is very important. The Rafah crossing, which was just opened a day or so ago, but we don't know for how long. And people have been saying, well, Egypt should just open up and allow all the Palestinians to flood into past the Rafah crossing. But that's not going to solve the problem, because if they allow 2 million Palestinians, or force 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza into Egypt, then they're not going to just sit there. They're going to continue to fight. So then that means that the IDF will have to start bombing Egypt again in order to try to curtail the Palestinians and whoever else is based there to carry on an armed struggle against the Israeli Defense Forces. So yes, what led to their demise, of course, was the deteriorating socioeconomic conditions on the part of the Egyptian masses, poor conditions for Egyptian workers, for young people, high unemployment, and repression on the part of the Egyptian state because Hosni Mubarak, in his attempt to maintain the status quo, i.e., money coming in from the United States and other European countries, had to suppress the left and the youth inside the country. And that's what led up to the crisis of 2010 and 2011, where there were huge demonstrations that took place in Egypt, resulting in the resignation of Hosni Mubarak and his replacement by a military regime. And that military regime, of course, maintained the status quo. And it took a long time, like
Well,
a
and
year, even to have elections in Egypt in order to move towards more of a civilian government there.
before we talk about Mohammed Morsi, now Hosni Mubarak, did he die while he was in prison, or did he die outside of prison? Because I believe he was prosecuted for for the murder of several protesters, and he was very ill with cancer or whatever disease that he had at the time. But I think at the end of the day, didn't the courts actually acquit him, and he actually ended up, dying peacefully in the in the comforts of his own home. On top of that,
Uh, when did he die? I've never heard of him passing away. Do you know?
you know what? Let me quickly check. Yeah, actually, let me quickly
Because he
check.
was in hospital after he was overthrown by other elements in the military, and then he was pretty much forgotten. Um, they said
Yes,
they
yes,
put him.
yes, yes. In fact, he passed away. He passed away this month, the 25th of February, this month, 2020, at the El Gala Hospital for Armed Forces and Officers Family.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, he was never. I think he was put in some type of detention, and then he was put like more or less under house arrest or whatever. But he was never really, prosecuted or persecuted for the crimes that he committed against the people of Egypt as a whole, whether it's their alliance with the state of Israel or the United States, and also their crackdown on the part of the Egyptian military and the security forces against the people in Egypt itself who were actually fighting to try to transform the government into something that was more democratic and more progressive.
Yes, and now let's talk about the rise of Morsi. Now, I actually have to correct my
Okay.
now I actually have to correct myself. Morsi and his government was part of the Freedom and Justice Party. They are closely
Right.
associated with the Muslim Brotherhood internationally, and
Right.
they are closely associated, and I think are members of the local Egyptian chapter branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, but not the group formally. Now, they are very, very right wing, both socially and economically. And according to Wikipedia, the party believes in Islamism, a mixed economy, economic liberalism, neoliberalism, and their political positions range from the center right to right wing. And they claimed, according to Wikipedia, this party claimed that women or Copts serving in ministerial post cabinet positions, though it deems both unsuitable for the presidency, the group supports a mixed economy with social justice, but without manipulation or monopoly. And the party's political program would include tourism as a main source of national income. And the Freedom and Justice Party, they base themselves on Islamic law, but will be acceptable to a wide segment of the population, said leader Essam El-Iranian. And the party's membership is open to all Egyptians who accept the terms of its program. The spokesperson for the party said, when we talk about the slogans of the revolution, freedom, social justice, equality, all of those are in Sharia law. So, and there is a rivalry between the Freedom and Justice Party and the Salafists, who regard the Freedom and Justice Party as having watering down their values, and they wanted to overturn and repeal the Camp David Accords with Israel, which they believed isolated them from the rest of the Arab world and the regions as a whole. And they claimed that Israeli products caused a lot of harm on the people of Egypt. So, with all that said, is there any socioeconomic legacy to speak of when we talk about Morsi and what led to his downfall, which was also arguably a UK, US, Israeli, and even Gulf monarch backed coup against him?
Yeah, I think that all that rhetoric, about the repeal of the Camp David Accord, the year that they were in power did not materialize at all. And they tried to maintain good relations with the United States, along with the Gulf monarchs. And Morsi did attend the non-aligned summit, which took place in Iran back in 20, when he was elected. I think it was in 2012, 2013, and did not go over very well at that non-aligned summit conference. And then, of course, he was overthrown by the military. But his legacy was that under his rule, he could not stabilize the situation inside of Egypt. The economic situation deteriorated. The masses came out and demonstrated heavily. But it is speculated that pro-Western, pro-imperialist elements did not want the Muslim Brotherhood in power for whatever reason. And as a result, they were overthrown and replaced by the military. Now, there were people in Egypt who said they preferred military rule over the rule of the Muslim Brotherhood. And that's what they have at this point. And of course, Abdel Fattah El-Sisi has run for office at least twice since taking over as a military leader. And he has won, but nobody really knows how effective or how free and fair the elections were that have been held in Egypt, which brought Abdel Fattah al-Sisi back to power. So it's really not clear what the legacy of Mohamed Morsi was. He was put on trial and he was imprisoned. And in fact, he died in prison several years ago. And there's very little talk about him within the general media in Egypt, although the Muslim Brotherhood still exists as an organization. Now, there was a lot of discussion about the links between the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas in Gaza, that there was a close relationship. But if you look at the politics of Hamas and how it's evolved over the last perhaps 3 decades, it appears to be a gulf between the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Hamas, at least under the current leadership or the leadership of Ismail Haniyeh, seemed to move more, and they did move more towards Iran, and seemed to be much more progressive in its approach to both domestic as well as international politics. But Hamas has suffered immensely since the day in which October 7, 2023, and then over the last year, a lot of their top leaders have been assassinated by the Israeli Defense Forces. So they're in the process of rebuilding, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens in Gaza in light of the so-called Board of Peace that was set up by Trump and other issues that are still going on right now, whether or not this Board of Peace will be able to sustain itself, and whether or not there'll be another uprising in Palestine in the not too distant future.
And Egypt, as you mentioned, Egypt, since the ouster of Morsi, has been under what can only be described as a far-right, right-leaning military dictatorship led by General Sisi. And like Pervez Musharraf of Pakistan, very closely aligned with the West, He has since not served in his military uniform. As you already mentioned, there were elections, I believe, last year or some years back, and I think it's safe to say it was widely rigged and suppressed, marred by voter intimidation and more. And Sisi is now the fake civilian government, and he still is advancing a socio-economic program like Sadat Mubarak and arguably Morsi before, which is very right wing. So, do explain more of the current affairs that the largely working class, working poor, precarious middle class is happening in Egypt, and if there's more of Sisi's foreign policy you want to talk about, you want to talk about, please feel free to.
Well, two things. One is that they still are dependent upon the International Monetary Fund for loans and refinancing of international debt, which has been a major problem in
Wow.
Egypt going all the way back to the late 19th century. We talked about earlier how the modernization efforts caused tremendous economic difficulties in the late 19th century in Egypt. They had to borrow a lot of money from European banks. So we're still seeing a similar problem in modern day Egypt, that they have to go to the International Monetary Fund essentially to get bailed out because of the unsustainable economy. Another issue, which is very, very important, is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam project, which is being built by the Ethiopian government. And there's a huge disagreement between the El-Sisi government and even the Morsi government prior to that, and the government of Abiy, the prime minister of the Federal Republic, Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, to the point where there's even been threats of a potential military conflict again
Wow.
between Egypt and Ethiopia. We talked about the what had happened during the late part of the 19th century when there was a war where Egypt had actually intervened in Ethiopia and it occupied the port in Eritrea of Massawa, but then they were driven out the following year of 1875. So even today, because of the flow of the Nile, which was redirected at the aegis of British colonialism, the Egyptian government up to this day want to maintain that same agreement, which was set up by the British. And the Ethiopians have actually opened up this dam, and it will remain to be seen what actually happens between the government of Al-Sisi and the government of Abiy. So we'll see what happens, but it would be great if Egypt and Ethiopia could cooperate. It would be a major advancement for Pan-Africanism in that regard, because they have two of the largest population groups on the African continent. Next to Nigeria, you have Ethiopia and then Egypt. So the unity of Ethiopia and Egypt would be a tremendous advancement as far as African unity and unification is concerned. But we still have this micro-nationalist outlook on the part of Egypt and on the part of elements as well inside of Ethiopia. Tensions are rising there in Ethiopia as well between the people of Tigray, even the Amhara militia groups have had difficulties with the central government in Addis Ababa, as well as the TPLF, which is split now, but tensions are still pretty high between the central government and the people of Tigray, as well as Oromo, which is in the south. They have the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia. So all of these divisions are doing nothing except holding Africa back in regard to unity and economic development.
That's a perfect segue to this question, which is what needs to happen for Egypt to really advance a socialist agenda. And despite mistakes and setbacks by even left-wing or left-leaning governments, if the working class and precarious middle class really wants their plight addressed, it can only be socialism, Pan-Africanism, Pan-Arabism, or Pan-West Asian or Pan-Middle Easternism of a left-wing orientation, and yeah. So answer that, and then my follow-up question to that is: does Egypt have a strong enough left-wing movement to advance that, which is secular and feministic as well? I'm very curious your response.
Well, you pretty much answered the question in terms of what is needed in Egypt. Yeah, that is definitely what is needed. Um, Not necessarily going back to what Nasser did, because we were talking about over a half century ago. But at the same time, the idea of modernization, bringing together the Christian and Muslim populations into one united front, and also the unity of West Asia and also of Africa as a whole is what is actually needed in regard to building a genuine and sustainable future for Egypt, as well as countries in the surrounding areas as well.
And you already answered this question throughout this interview, but talk more about this, which is what was Egypt's foreign policy like during the Cold War? Was it was it non-aligned but mostly leaned towards the USSR, China, the Eastern European Communist bloc, Cuba, and Vietnam, or was it détente with the U.S. minus the Suez Canal crisis in Israel during its early years of independence from Britain? Very curious your response.
Well, clearly after 1952, it was definitely more leaning towards the socialist bloc. Also, the whole question of Pan-Arabism was very, very important, and secularism as well. And then they were founders of the non-aligned movement. They attended the Bandung Summit of 1955, the discussions that took place 5 to 6 years after that, the formation of the non-aligned movement in Belgrade in 1961. So yes, it definitely was leaning more towards the socialist camp, although they tried to maintain a balance in regard to relations with the United States. But they realized that it was useless because the United States was clearly committed to the maintenance and the growth of the state of Israel. So yes, I would say that they leaned more towards the USSR and more towards the socialist camp, although the internal left did suffer repression. But relations with the Soviet Union were fairly good. I mean, in terms of the building of the Aswan Dam, the supplying of Egypt with weapons. Now that started to change, of course, after Anwar Sadat took over and the problems he had with the Soviet Union initially, but it did not break relations with them, because in '73 they played an important role during the so-called October War of 1973. But now they tend to have good relations with the Russian Federation, even under El-Sisi. It's a lot of tourism between Russia and Egypt, and I think the relations are fairly good between the two states. Russia is no longer a socialist state, although their interests collide with the interests of U.S. imperialism. And with the building up of NATO in Eastern Europe, this is even aggravated even further relations between the Russian Federation and its allies and the NATO countries. And of course, today we have the special military operations by the Russian Federation in Ukraine, and that has not been resolved, even though Trump said that he was going to resolve it in 24 hours over a year ago, and it has not happened. It has not happened
Yeah.
at all. And he wants a Nobel Peace Prize for nothing, because none of these wars have been resolved.
Exactly.
I mean, look at the Eastern DRC. What's going on there? They have not resolved the crisis there between Rwanda and Kinshasa. Not at all. And so, this is very, very interesting that he's wants a Nobel Peace Prize, but he's only causing more havoc and more discontent internationally. Look what he's done in regard to Venezuela,
Exactly,
and the
exactly.
so-called board of peace over Gaza. They need to
Although,
get out and allow
although
the
Abayomi,
Palestinians to determine their own destiny.
although Abayomi, you would be surprised, but there are some nincompoops that think that Donald Trump deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. Bill Maher, you might be familiar with him.
Of
Uh,
course, he's back and forth for what, 2 decades now, back and
exactly,
forth on
exactly. On
this
his
issue that,
on his HBO program, Nickel and Dimes with Bill Maher, he said the following. He said that, hey, if Donald Trump manages to overthrow the Islamic Republic of Iran, Cuba, and the Venezuelan government, shouldn't we give him the Nobel Peace Prize?
yeah, I'm
And
not
this is a
surprised.
person, and this is a person that's supposed to be considered the far left in the
Really,
corporate media sphere.
I've never heard that before, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's not surprising. He wants to
Um,
stay on the air, so he has to cozy up to Trump and his administration,
and
unlike the others, Jimmy Kimmel and some of the others who have been. Well, Kimmel, they got him back on because people began to cancel their subscriptions to the network.
maybe that's
So
what
that
people
was
have to do
great.
in order to keep Colbert on because he's getting the
Yeah,
axe from CBS. But
exactly.
but uh,
Yeah.
but uh, but going back to Egypt, well, you've already sort of talked about it, but let's talk about it a bit more. What are Egypt's relations with BRICS? Is it historically close with some members compared to others? And if
Well, they
relations
joined. Yeah.
and if relations with BRICS are largely cordial, will that relationship continue to flourish unless Western imperialists sabotage it?
Yeah, they joined BRICS at a summit a couple of years ago, and it's quite an interesting, coalition because you got Ethiopia, which is now part of it, and other states. Saudi Arabia is really not clear. They said they wanted to join, but it wasn't clear. Maybe they have by now. But yes, I think they have good relations with the BRICS countries. How long it would last, I'm not sure. The Trump administration is extremely hostile towards BRICS. Even the previous Democratic administration of Joe Biden was also hostile to BRICS as well. But I think BRICS is a force, and they have brought together people who constitute over one half of the world's population. So I don't think they're going away. And I think that's the problem that the Trump administration has, how to deal with the emerging economies and these new alliances that are being formed that exclude the United States. This is a major problem that they have, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with it.
Interesting. And I have a bonus question to ask, but let me ask this question first, which is what's been Egypt's response to the largely anti French African upheavals that we've been seeing in West Africa? Has Egypt been largely supportive, hostile, or has mostly remained neutral? Very curious response.
Seems like they've remained neutral. I haven't seen any comments by El-Sisi or the Foreign Ministry of Egypt in regard to what's happening with the AES. I'm sure they're being very cautious because there's still a lot of security issues. We know in Niger, just a week or so ago, there was an attack at the airport in Niamey. The government was not crippled in any way, but still it goes to show the security threats that they're facing. In Mali, very similar situation. There was a blockade of fuel imports into the capital of Bamako. The government is trying to resolve that under Assimi Goïta. And in Burkina Faso, under Ibrahim Traore, they've been having problems as well, assassination attempts and other issues. These countries are landlocked, and they are under tremendous pressure on the part of France as well as the United States to change course. So I'm not sure if Egypt wants to get involved in that. They have been involved in the situation in Sudan, where since April 15th of 2023, there's been a war between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces. It appears as if the government of El-Sisi is supporting the Sudanese Armed Forces. The head of the Sovereign Council, Abdel Al-Fatah, al-Burhan. So they seem to be supporting the Sudanese Armed Forces in Sudan and want the RSF defeated, whereas the United Arab Emirates, it is said, is supporting the Rapid Support Forces. Now, according to reports from Sudan in the last few days, they've made tremendous progress in defeating the RSF. We'll have to see if that continues over the next few weeks, but they've been able to retake the capital of Khartoum, and they've been able to take other areas inside of Sudan. So they have there appears to be very good relations between Egypt and Sudan, but not good relations between Egypt and Ethiopia.
Interesting. And this and bonus question before we wrap up is you talked a lot about Israel and Egyptian Israeli relations, and with the ongoing genocides. Some people are calling it a humanitarian disaster, but let's just call it what it is. With the ongoing genocide that is still happening in Gaza, the continuous displacement of indigenous Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Do you think? I want you to do this. First of all, myth bust for our rabid Zionist friends and people who support Israel and say that Israel is surrounded by hostile enemies. Debunk that myth, because actually Egyptian relations with Israel since the end of Nasser, from Anwar Sadat to the present, largely mostly behind the scenes, but I think even openly, Egypt is actually on the side of Israel and actually continuously ignores the grievances of the Palestinians. And when people talk about the two-state solution, which was, hail, this is the only way to end the suffering of both Palestinians and Israelis. With the two-state solution, we still see Israel putting up illegal settlements in the West Bank. They did, under Ariel Sharon, get rid of all of the illegal settlements that was in Gaza, but Gaza's been an open-air prison, has been crippled by Israel for having the audacity to vote for Hamas and so forth. So I want you to, and so it seems as if, in hindsight, a lot of people who were skeptical of the peace accords that Yasser Arafat broke with Yitzhak Rabin, which Egypt supported, which Jordan supported, and then you had other countries that started to normalize relationships with Egypt, that the Palestinians have been the biggest losers in that, and that they haven't even gotten their own small one state in Gaza, one state in the West Bank, and so forth. And Israel has actually been the biggest loser. And then when we look at Egyptian-Israeli relations, Israel is not surrounded by hostile neighbors. In fact, all of their neighbors, including in North Africa, seem to be very accommodating towards Israel. So I want you to talk about that, because as you were talking about Egyptian-Israeli relations, that was going on in my head a lot. So
yeah, I think they're not surrounded by hostile forces. Now you have Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, which is a force to be reckoned with. But there's supposed to be a ceasefire right now, which the Israelis are violating almost every day in regard to Lebanon. They've overthrown the government in Syria. They have a pro-imperialist government in Syria right now, which used to be considered terrorist, Al-Qaeda affiliated HTS organization. And, they've traveled to the United States. They've met with Trump, so they're definitely not hostile at this point, unless there's a change in Syria. So no, I don't see them being surrounded by hostile elements. The masses in those states are against the state of Israel, if they're able to take control of the governments, then yeah, they will be challenged, encircled. But I think it was a major, a major error on the part of the Palestine Liberation Organization, even under Yasser Arafat, who I admire tremendously for raising the profile of the Palestinian people to a global level. The fact that in 1988, he recognized the right of the state of Israel to exist. And then in 1993, signed the Oslo Accords.
Yeah.
Which was supposed to lead towards a two-state solution. And it never did. And by the early 2000s, 2002, 2003, they had turned completely against Arafat. And he was put under house arrest and he died at the aegis of the Israeli Defense Forces. So the person who took over, Mahmoud Abbas, after him, is even more conciliatory towards the United States and the state of Israel. So no, the situation of the Palestinians are horrendous. And Egypt, the government in Egypt is culpable. The monarchy in Jordan is also culpable. And those elements in Lebanon and Syria are also involved in the ongoing national oppression, economic exploitation, and genocide against the Palestinians.
And very briefly, can you talk to people, especially those who are starting to who want justice for the Palestinians, and there are some who who are ignorant on a lot of the day-to-day affairs. Can you also debunk how the PLO is not this this a force for good for the Palestinians, which is often butting heads with the Israelis, that actually since the Oslo Peace Accords, certainly under the current leadership of Abbas, that they've actually been a colonial viceroy for the occupation and have actually been, as when there are uprisings and people protesting in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, the PLO, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, actually kneecaps those movements and actually arrests people who even protest, let alone the people who take up armed struggle. But they even arrest millions of people who try to organize strikes and whatnot, and even do peaceful protests against the state of Israel.
Yeah, this has damaged the credibility of the top leadership of the what they call now the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas and his cabinet, even though they're basically under imprisonment as well. I mean, they wouldn't even give him a visa to come to the United Nations General Assembly in September, despite the fact that he's been working side by side with the United States and the state of Israel. But he cannot control what everybody in the Palestinian movement is doing. In Gaza, for example, there were about 10, perhaps 9 or 10 different organizations that were participating in the resistance. Alongside Hamas, you had the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, there was the PFLP, the DFLP, and others who apparently had broken with the top PLO leadership and were fighting alongside the resistance in Gaza. And we've seen that also in the West Bank, where there have been other groups that have broken with the Palestinian Authority and are carrying out operations against the Israeli Defense Forces. So despite the fact that they appear to have been collaborators, complete collaborators with the state of Israel and the United States, they cannot control completely what the people are doing, or the other organizations, even some of them that are even affiliated with the PLO, they cannot completely control what they're doing in the state of Palestine.
Interesting. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. We were joined on this edition of 1+1 with our always wonderful returning champion and our historian, tour guide Abayomi Azikiwe. Did I mispronounce it again, or?
Sounds good. Sounds good to me.
of Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Check out his work and that of his colleagues and comrades at both websites. Donate generously to both and subscribe to them. And please remember to share widely One Plus One's work, our playlist, our past and new and most recent episodes, and donate to One Plus One if you can. Next week, looking forward to this. We will explore the history and current affairs of Libya. Join us then. And until then, good night and good luck. Have a great weekend, folks. All my best and good luck to all the athletes at the Winter Olympics. And also rest in
And
peace.
look out for ICE.
Huh?
They should look out for ICE.
Yes.
The people don't want them there, but they send them anyway. So
yes, so people and yes, so and if you're a leftist that doesn't even care about the Winter Olympics, do go there to protest the presence of ICE. And rest in peace to Catherine O'Hara. All my best, everyone. Ciao till then.